The day they fired me, they thought they were saving the company $50,000. They had no idea they were about to lose the one thing worth millions. I still remember the exact moment I walked into conference room 7. It was 9:12 on a Monday morning. The glass walls were covered with the usual motivational posters about teamwork, innovation and integrity. Funny, because 3 people were already sitting inside waiting to destroy my career before lunch. At the center of the table sat my manager, Daniel Brooks. Beside him was Karen Mills from Human Resources. And at the far end, wearing a navy suit and looking completely relaxed, was Richard Hale, the company's chief operating officer. Richard had never attended one of my performance meetings before. That should have been my first warning. Daniel pointed toward the empty chair. "Have a seat, Alex." I sat down. Karen slid a folder across the table. I looked at it but didn't open it. "What is this?" Daniel sighed. "Alex, this isn't easy." I almost laughed. People only say that when they're about to do something very easy for themselves. I looked from Daniel to Karen. "Am I being fired?" Nobody answered for 3 seconds. Then Karen said the sentence I had already understood. "Your position is being eliminated, not terminated, not fired, eliminated." Corporate language has a strange way of making betrayal sound like weather. I looked at Daniel. "Why?" He folded his hands. "Budget restructuring." "Yes." "What happened to the project?" Daniel looked away. "The company is reducing operating expenses." I stared at him. For 4 years, I had worked for Apex Dynamics, a technology company that had grown from a small startup into one of the fastest growing manufacturers in the industry. And for the last 2 years, I had been the lead engineer behind the company's most important product, the Pulse Core. It was a compact energy control system used in industrial equipment. When I joined Apex, Pulse Core didn't exist. I designed the first working prototype. I wrote the control logic. I solved the overheating problem that had stopped the original development team. I redesigned the internal architecture. And most importantly, I created the technology that made the device commercially viable. The company had turned that invention into a product worth millions. But sitting across from me, Daniel was acting as if I were an expensive office chair they no longer needed. "What exactly is being eliminated?" I asked. "My position," Daniel said. "And the Pulse Core team. The team will continue." "So you're keeping the project and removing me?" Daniel nodded. "That's correct." I looked at Richard. He had been silent the entire time. "Did you approve this?" He finally spoke. "Alex, these decisions are about the future of the company. They're not personal." That sentence almost made me smile, because I knew something they didn't. It was extremely personal, not because I wanted revenge, not yet, but because 3 months earlier, I had filed something that could change everything. A patent application, not under Apex Dynamics, under my own name. I had done it legally, carefully, with an attorney, and I had kept every document. The reason was simple. The core invention behind the next generation Pulse Core wasn't technically owned by Apex. It was mine. And the executives sitting across from me had just fired the person who owned the technology they planned to build their future around. Karen pushed the termination papers toward me. "You'll receive 6 weeks of severance." I looked down. 6 weeks. After 4 years of 16-hour days. After missed birthdays. After canceled vacations. After answering calls at midnight because production was failing. 6 weeks. Daniel leaned forward. "We know this is difficult." I finally opened the folder. There it was. My entire career reduced to a few pages. "Can I ask one question?" Karen nodded. "Why now?" Daniel hesitated. Richard answered. "We've reviewed the financial projections, and we believe we can restructure the engineering department and save approximately $50,000 annually." 50,000. That number stayed in my head. They were firing me to save 50,000. I slowly closed the folder. "Understood." Daniel looked relieved. Maybe he expected anger, maybe tears, maybe an argument. Instead I stood. I picked up my laptop bag. Then I looked directly at Richard. "Before I leave, I just want to say something." He raised his eyebrows. "Go ahead." "I hope you reviewed everything before making this decision." Richard smiled. "We did. Everything. Everything." I nodded. "Good." And I walked out. Nobody stopped me. Nobody asked what I meant. Nobody realized that the biggest mistake they had ever made had just walked calmly through their glass doors. To understand why I wasn't worried, you have to understand how the Pulse Core was created. When I joined Apex Dynamics, the company had fewer than 50 employees. The founder, Martin Cole, was still involved in daily operations. He was brilliant, intense, and obsessed with one thing. building technology that could compete with companies 10 times our size. I joined as a junior systems engineer. At first, I wasn't important. I made diagrams, I tested components, I documented failures, I stayed late. Then one evening, everything changed. The original PulseCore prototype failed during testing. The unit overheated, again and again, and again. The senior engineers had spent months trying to solve it. Everyone had a theory: wrong materials, bad cooling, poor power distribution, faulty sensors. I noticed something different. The problem wasn't one component, it was the way the components communicated. The system was reacting too slowly to changes in load. So I wrote a new control method. It was simple, at least compared with the complicated solutions everyone else was proposing. I stayed in the lab until 20:40 in the morning. I rewrote the control logic. Then I ran the test. The machine powered up. The temperature stayed stable. I stared at the monitor. For the first time in months, the system was working. The next morning, I showed Martin. He didn't say anything for almost a minute. Then he smiled. "Do it again." I did. It worked. He looked at me. "Do you know what you've just done? Fixed the overheating." "No." He pointed at the prototype. "You made this product possible." That moment changed my life. I became part of the core development team. Over the next 18 months, we transformed the prototype into a commercial product. Sales exploded. The company grew. We moved offices. We hired dozens of people. Investors started calling. And suddenly everyone wanted to know who had built the technology. The official answer was always, Apex Dynamics engineering team. I didn't complain. I wasn't chasing fame. I wanted to build things. But there was one problem. As the company grew, the culture changed. Martin stepped back. Executives came in. Investors wanted faster profits. And people who had never touched the product began making decisions about it. That was when Daniel Brooks became my manager. Daniel wasn't an engineer. He was a business executive. He knew numbers. He knew presentations. He knew how to make senior leadership happy. But he didn't understand the technology. At first, we got along. Then I began developing the next generation PulseCore. It was smaller, more efficient, cheaper to manufacture, and far more powerful. The problem was that the central control architecture was based on my original invention. I had improved it significantly. One night, while reviewing the technical documentation, I realized something important. The new architecture wasn't merely an improvement to the old system. It was a distinct invention, something that could potentially be patented separately. I mentioned it to Daniel. His response was immediate. "Don't waste time on that. It's important. Lego will handle it. I think we should discuss ownership before development goes further." Daniel looked at me. "Alex, you're an employee. I understand. Anything you create here belongs to the company. I understand the general rule." "Then what's the issue?" "The issue is that the new system was developed partly on my own time, before the company assigned the project." He didn't like that. I could tell. "Are you trying to claim the invention?" "No." "Then, I want the ownership clarified." Daniel leaned back. "You're overthinking this." That conversation ended there. And neither did Daniel. A week later, I contacted an intellectual property attorney. I brought every document I had, my old notebooks, design files, emails, development logs, the early prototypes. The attorney spent hours reviewing everything. Then she looked at me. "Did the company formally assign this invention to itself?" "I signed an employment agreement." "Does it contain a specific invention assignment clause?" "Yes." "Does it cover inventions developed entirely outside company resources and unrelated to your assigned work?" I handed her the agreement. She read it. Then she looked up. "Interesting." That word made my stomach tighten. "What?" She pointed at a section. "This clause isn't as broad as they think it is." I didn't understand. She explained. The company's ownership rights depended on several facts. When the invention was conceived, where it was developed, what resources were used, what work I had been assigned, and whether the invention was directly derived from company-owned technology. The details mattered. And I had something the executives didn't know: a complete development record. The original concept for the new architecture had been developed in my personal notebook 3 weeks before Apex formally assigned me to the project. I had also emailed a draft concept to myself from my personal account. That email contained a timestamp. The timestamp was before the company's project existed. My attorney looked at the evidence. "You should file." So I did. The patent application was submitted. My name was on it. Not Apex Dynamics. Mine. I didn't tell the company. I wasn't trying to steal anything. I simply wanted my rights documented before someone else decided they didn't exist. And then came that Monday morning. The day they fired me to save $50,000. I drove home after the meeting without turning on the radio. My phone kept buzzing. Coworkers, friends, messages from people asking what happened. I didn't answer. When I got home, I sat in my car for almost 20 minutes. I was angry. Of course I was angry. Anyone would be. But underneath the anger was something else. Clarity. They had made their decision. Now I could make mine. I walked into my apartment. My phone rang. It was my attorney. Heard. How? Your company contacted our office. I froze. What did they say? They asked about your patent. My stomach dropped. Already. Apparently someone in legal reviewed your termination paperwork. I sat down. What did you tell them? Nothing beyond confirming that I represent you. Silence. Then she said, I need to ask you something. What? Did they know you filed? No. Are you sure? Completely. Bet. Then don't contact them. Why? Because they're about to make a very interesting mistake. What kind? They believe they own the patent. I laughed. Not because it was funny, because I couldn't believe it. How? Probably because they assume everything you developed while employed belongs to them. I know. She interrupted gently. That's why we need to be careful. The next morning, I received an email from Apex. The subject line read Intellectual Property Clarification. I opened it. The message was from corporate counsel. It stated that the company had become aware of a patent application connected to technology developed during my employment. They requested that I immediately provide all documents relating to the application. I forwarded it to my attorney. She replied, do not respond yet. That afternoon, another email arrived, this time from Daniel. Alex, I hope we can resolve this professionally. I stared at that sentence. Professionally. The same man who had fired me to save $50,000 now wanted to resolve something professionally. I didn't answer. 2 days passed. Then I received a formal letter. Apex claimed the patent belonged to the company. They demanded that I assign ownership. My attorney called me. Are you ready? For what? To show them the evidence. I wasn't sure. What happens if they fight? Then we fight. How long? Could take months. I looked out the window. What if they try to bury me? She laughed softly. They already fired you. That sentence hit harder than anything else. She was right. There was nothing left for them to take. My job was gone. My income from Apex was gone. My position was gone. But the invention remained. And now I had to protect it. The first official meeting happened 1 week later. I walked into a law office with my attorney. Across from us were 3 people from Apex. Their corporate lawyer, Daniel, and Richard Hale, the same man who had told me they were saving $50,000 by removing my position. Richard looked uncomfortable. I sat down. Nobody shook hands. The corporate lawyer opened a folder. Mr. Carter, Apex Dynamics believes the patent application relates directly to technology developed during your employment. It does. He seemed surprised by my answer. Then you acknowledge the company's claim. No. He frowned. I acknowledge the technology was developed while I worked there. That's not what I asked. I know. My attorney placed a document on the table. This is the timeline. The lawyer glanced at it. Then his expression changed. The document showed dates, every major development, every meeting, every design revision, every assignment, and one important fact. The first complete conception of the patented architecture occurred before Apex assigned me to the project. The lawyer looked at Daniel. Daniel looked at Richard. Richard's face tightened. The lawyer continued. These records are incomplete. My attorney smiled. They're only the beginning. I could almost see the confidence leaving the room. Then Richard spoke. Alex, why didn't you come to us before filing? I looked at him. I tried. When? I gave him the date. Daniel shifted in his chair. I continued. I raised the issue with Daniel. Daniel cleared his throat. We discussed intellectual property generally. No. I looked at him. We discussed this invention specifically. He didn't ask. Why didn't you escalate? Because I trusted my manager. Nobody spoke. I continued. And then you fired me. That sentence sat in the room like a weight. Richard leaned back. That decision had nothing to do with the patent. I didn't say it did. But you're implying. No. I stopped him. I'm not implying anything. My attorney leaned forward. That's an important distinction. The corporate lawyer closed the folder. We'll need time to review the documentation. Take your time, my attorney said. We stood. As I walked toward the door, Richard called my name. Alex. I turned. He looked different now, less confident. Can we talk privately? I looked at my attorney. She nodded. I stayed. Richard lowered his voice. I think this situation has gotten out of hand. No. He blinked. No. This situation was created when you fired me. He sighed. We made a financial decision. You saved $50,000. That's not the only consideration. Then what was? He didn't answer. I knew. The company believed I was replaceable. That was the real betrayal. Not the firing. Not the money. The assumption that everything I had built could continue without me. How do we fix this? I answered honestly. You recognize the patent. His expression hardened. That's impossible. Then we're done. I walked out. For the first time since being fired, I felt calm. Because now they knew. And they were scared. The next month changed everything. Apex continued selling the original Pulse Core. But the new generation was supposed to launch within 6 months. That product depended on my patented architecture. Without it, they had a problem. A very expensive problem. They tried to work around it. Their engineers spent weeks attempting to design a replacement system. But every alternative had the same weaknesses. Higher manufacturing costs, lower efficiency, more complex software, and worse performance. I heard about it through former coworkers. One of them called me late one night. Alex. Yeah, I shouldn't be calling. Then why are you? He laughed. Because you need to know. What? The new prototype is failing. I said nothing. Management is panicking. Why? They thought they could replace your work. I leaned back. Can they? Not easily. That was the first time I realized how deep the problem was. They hadn't simply fired me. They had removed the person who understood why the system worked. And now everyone was trying to reconstruct something they didn't fully understand. They tried to work around it. Their engineers spent weeks attempting to design a replacement system. But every alternative had the same weaknesses. Higher manufacturing costs. Now they were spending millions trying to replace what they had thrown away. But I wasn't celebrating. Not yet. Because my attorney warned me. Don't underestimate them. Why? Companies under pressure make desperate decisions. What do you expect? Either they'll negotiate or they'll attack the patent. They chose both. First they offered me money, a lot of money. The first offer was $250,000. I rejected it. Then $500,000. Rejected. Then $1 million. I asked for something different. I want ownership recognized. They refused. My attorney told them, then no deal. The next week, Apex filed a formal challenge against my patent. That was when the real battle began. The legal process was exhausting. Every document mattered. Every date mattered. Every sentence mattered. Apex argued that the invention was derived from company work. They claimed I had used company resources. They claimed my employment contract transferred ownership. They claimed the patented architecture was merely an improvement to their existing system. My attorney prepared the response. But there was one piece of evidence that made everything much stronger. My old notebook. It was sitting in a drawer in my apartment. Black cover. Bent corner. Coffee stain on page 14. Inside were hundreds of handwritten notes. The original architecture. The diagrams. The equations. The testing ideas. And dates. The first concept had been written down before Apex's official development project began. But there was more. I had saved a voice recording from an old meeting. Years earlier, when the company was still small, Martin Cole had asked me to explain how I solved the original Pulse Core problem. I had recorded the meeting because I was supposed to create documentation afterward. During the recording, Martin said something that became incredibly important. He said, "Alex, this new control approach is your invention. We'll work out the company paperwork later." That sentence was never meant to become evidence. But it did. My attorney listened to it twice. This is powerful. Is it enough? Nothing is guaranteed. She paused. But it changes the conversation. Apex's lawyers heard the recording. Their confidence disappeared. Then came another discovery. The company had internal emails discussing my firing. One email from Daniel to Richard said, "If we eliminate Alex's position, we can save approximately $50K annually and redistribute his responsibilities." Another email said, "The engineering team should be capable of continuing without him." Then there was one sentence that became the center of the dispute. "The patent issue can be dealt with later." Later. They had known enough to worry, but not enough to understand. They fired me anyway. When those emails came out, I knew the case had changed. This was no longer just a disagreement about intellectual property. It was about whether the company had knowingly removed the inventor while assuming they could keep the invention. 3 weeks later, Apex's board called an emergency meeting. I wasn't there. But I learned what happened afterward. The company's financial director presented a report. The new product launch was delayed. Customers were waiting. Investors were asking questions. Manufacturing partners were becoming nervous. And the legal dispute was creating uncertainty. Then someone asked the obvious question. How much will it cost to replace the patented technology? The answer was devastating. At least 80 million. Possibly more. Another director asked, and how much would it cost to settle with Alex? Nobody answered immediately. Then someone said, far less. That was the moment the board finally understood. They hadn't saved 50,000. They had risked an entire product line, and now they had to decide how much their mistake was worth. The next morning, Richard called me. I almost said no. But I agreed. We met at a quiet restaurant. Richard looked exhausted. He ordered coffee. I didn't order anything. He stared at me. Owe you an apology? I said nothing. We made a mistake. Yes. We underestimated your contribution. Wes. We also misunderstood the legal position. Yes. He sighed. Do you enjoy this? What? Watching us struggle. I looked at him. No. He seemed surprised. I don't. Then why won't you just sell us the patent? Because that's not what this is about. Then what is it about? I answered, respect. He looked down. I continued. You fired me like I was a cost. You were expensive. I was expensive because I was creating value. He didn't respond. You didn't ask what I wanted before firing me. You wouldn't have stayed. You don't know that. He looked at me. Would you have? I thought about it. Maybe. That answer surprised him. I continued. I didn't want revenge. Then what did you want? To be treated like someone who mattered. Richard was quiet. Then he asked, what would it take? I finally looked him in the eyes. Recognize the patent. He hesitated. And restore the money you tried to save. He raised an eyebrow. You want your salary back? No. I smiled. I want the $50,000. He looked confused. Why? Because that's the amount you decided I was worth. I leaned forward. I want you to pay me that amount as a public acknowledgement that firing me was the wrong decision. He stared at me. That's it? No. I stood. There's one more thing. What? I want the engineering team protected from being treated the way I was. He looked surprised. I explained. People don't leave companies because they're expensive. They leave because they stop believing their work matters. Richard said nothing. Then he asked, would you come back? I looked at him. No. And for the first time he understood. Money couldn't undo what had happened. Apex eventually withdrew its demand for the patent. But I didn't immediately accept their settlement. Instead, I made my own proposal. They would recognize my ownership. They would receive a license to use the technology. The license would include royalties. And the company would publicly acknowledge that the technology had been developed by me. They didn't like the last part. But they accepted. The agreement was finalized 6 weeks later. The patent remained mine. Apex received commercial rights, and I received something more valuable than the money. Freedom. I could now license the technology to other companies. And I did. The first company that approached me was a manufacturer that had been competing with Apex. They had heard about the patent dispute. They wanted to meet. I walked into their office with my attorney. The CEO shook my hand. I've read about what happened. I figured. He smiled. We're interested in licensing your technology. How interested? He laughed. Very. That meeting became a partnership. Then another company called. Then another. Within a year, my invention was being used in products across several industries. I started my own engineering company. And one of the first people I hired was the junior engineer, who had called me the night the prototype was failing at Apex. He became my lead developer. I gave him something I had never received from Daniel. Ownership. When he came to me with an idea, I listened. When someone made a breakthrough, we documented their contribution. When we filed patents, the inventors were clearly named. I built the company I wished Apex had been. 2 years later, I received an invitation. Apex Dynamics was holding an industry conference. They wanted me to speak. The email came from Richard. The subject line was an invitation to return. I almost deleted it. Then I opened it. Richard wrote that the company had changed. New leadership, new engineering policies, new intellectual property procedures, and a new culture. He wanted me to give the keynote speech. I agreed. Not because I needed them, because I wanted to see what had changed. The conference hall was packed. Hundreds of people, executives, engineers, investors, customers, and former coworkers. I walked onto the stage. The applause was loud. I looked across the room. Richard was sitting in the front row. Daniel wasn't there. I wasn't surprised I began speaking. I want to tell you a story about a 50,000 decision. The room became quiet. 2 years ago, a company I worked for decided to eliminate my position to save 50,000. People shifted in their seats. I wasn't the most important person in the company. I wasn't the CEO. I wasn't the highest paid employee. I paused. But I had something they needed. The screen behind me showed the patent. My name appeared beneath it. This invention. I explained what happened, not angrily, not dramatically, just honestly. Then I said, the mistake wasn't firing me. The audience listened. The mistake was believing that the person creating value was just a cost. That sentence received the loudest applause. I looked at Richard. He nodded. I continued. Companies sometimes look at employees as expenses, salary, benefits, training, vacation. But the real question isn't what someone costs. The real question is what they create. The room was silent. I finished my speech with one final thought. If you want people to give you their best ideas, don't make them afraid that those ideas will make them disposable. The applause lasted almost a minute. Afterward, Richard approached me. You were always a good speaker. I learned from watching executives. He smiled. I deserve that. Maybe. He looked at me. Are you happy? I thought about it. Yes. More than you were here. Definitely. He laughed. Then he asked, do you ever think about what would have happened if we hadn't fired you? I smiled. And I probably would have stayed. He looked surprised. Really? Yes. I paused. But I wouldn't have built my company. He nodded slowly. So firing you was the best thing we ever did for you? No. I smiled. Firing me was the best thing I ever did for myself. Months later, something unexpected happened. Daniel contacted me. I hadn't spoken to him since the day I left. His message was short. Can we talk? I almost ignored it, but curiosity won. We met at a coffee shop. Older, tired, he told me he had left Apex. Why? They blamed me. For what? For the decision. I said nothing. He looked down. I thought I was doing the right thing. Yes. You didn't think about what I had built. I did. When? He hesitated. After you left. I nodded. He continued. I read your development notes. Why? Because we couldn't make the replacement work. He gave a small laugh. I spent 3 months trying to understand something you built in a few weeks. I smiled. That sounds familiar. He looked at me. Yes. I treated you like an employee. You were my manager. No. He shook his head. I treated you like a line item. That was the first time he had ever said it, and strangely, it felt better than any apology from the company. I accepted it. Then he asked, do you hate me? I thought for a moment. No. Why not? Because if I hate you, I'm still giving you space in my life. He smiled. That's fair. We sat quietly. Then he asked, was the 50,000 worth it? I laughed. Not for you. He laughed too. For the first time there was no bitterness. Just two people looking back at a mistake that changed both their lives. A few years passed. My company grew. We developed new technologies, filed more patents, built a team, and something interesting happened. People started coming to me with stories. Engineers who had been ignored. Designers whose ideas had been taken without credit. Employees who had been told they were replaceable. Some wanted jobs. Others wanted advice. I couldn't help everyone, but I always told them the same thing. Document your work. Keep your notes. Save your drafts. Record dates. Understand your agreements. Know what you create. And never assume someone values your contribution simply because they praise you in meetings. Because the truth is uncomfortable. A company can call you family on Friday and eliminate your position on Monday. That's business. You can't always control that. But you can control what you build. You can control how well you document it. You can control whether you understand your rights. And you can control what happens next. I learned that the hard way. The day I was fired. I thought my career had been destroyed. I thought 4 years of work had been erased with one signature. But it wasn't. The work was still there. The knowledge was still there. The invention was still mine. And most importantly, I was still me. That was the part they couldn't fire. About 5 years after the original firing, I received another invitation from Apex. This time, it wasn't for a conference, it was for a private meeting. The company had a new CEO. Her name was Elena Grant. She wanted to discuss a long-term partnership. When I arrived, I noticed something immediately. The conference room had changed. The motivational posters were gone. On the wall was a new Sounders. People of value. I smiled. Elena noticed. Do you like it? Very much. She sat down. We changed our intellectual property policy. I heard. Your case became a lesson for us. I looked at her. Good. She smiled. We also changed how we evaluate employees. How? We don't measure only cost anymore. That's smart. We measure value. I nodded. She opened a folder. We want to license several of your new technologies. I laughed. Funny how things change. They do. She paused. There's something else. What? We'd like to put your name on the Innovation Center. I stared at her. You don't have to. We want to. I didn't know what to say. She continued. Your story became part of the company. I looked around the room. 5 years earlier, I had walked into this building carrying a cardboard box. Now they wanted to put my name on a building. Life has a strange sense of humor. But I didn't need the recognition. I had already moved on. So I told her, do it for the next engineer. She smiled. What do you mean? Put their names on the work. Recognize the people who build things. Don't wait until they leave. She nodded. We will. That was enough. People sometimes ask me what happened to the $50,000. I invested it, not in stocks, not in a luxury car, not in some expensive vacation. I used it to start a scholarship inside my company. Every year, we give young engineers funding to develop an idea that might never make them rich. The only requirement is that they explain what problem they're trying to solve. The scholarship is called the 50,000 Project. The first winner was a 19-year-old student who had developed a simple device to reduce energy waste in small manufacturing systems. He reminded me of myself, young, excited, uncertain, and completely unaware that his idea could change his future. I gave him the check personally. He looked at me. Why did you create this? I told him the truth. Because someone once thought $50,000 was enough to measure my value. He didn't understand. So I explained. Never let someone else decide what your ideas are worth. He smiled. Then he asked, did your company ever regret firing you? I laughed. Probably. Are you still angry? No. Why? I looked at the prototype on his desk. Because sometimes rejection is just redirection. He thought about that. Then nodded. And I walked away. Looking back, I realized something. My revenge wasn't getting the patent. It wasn't the money. It wasn't the company. It wasn't watching Apex struggle. My revenge was becoming impossible to replace. Not because I wanted power. Because I learned to stop depending on one company to define my value. That was the real transformation. Before the firing, I believed success meant climbing the corporate ladder. After the firing, I realized success meant owning the ladder. I stopped asking, will they promote me? I started asking, what can I build? I stopped asking, do they appreciate me? I started asking, am I creating something meaningful? I stopped asking, how do I keep my job? I started asking, how do I build a life where losing one job doesn't destroy me? Those questions changed everything. The day Apex fired me, I lost my position, but I gained perspective, I gained independence, I gained confidence, and eventually, I gained the freedom to choose what happened next. Years later, Richard called me one final time. I wanted to say goodbye. Where are you going? Somewhere warm. I laughed. Good choice. There was a pause. Then he said, do you remember the first meeting after we fired you? Of course. I asked you how we could fix it. Wes, you told me recognition mattered more than money. I remember. I didn't understand that. I know. But I do now. I waited. He continued. Companies think people leave for money. Sometimes they do. But sometimes they leave because they stop believing they matter. I smiled. That's exactly right, he sighed. You changed how I manage people. Then something good came from it. It did. He paused. What? I still can't believe we fired you to save $50,000. I laughed. Neither can I. He laughed too. Then he said, take care, Alex. You too. Richard. The call ended. I looked at the wall in my office. There was a framed copy of my first patent. Under it was a small handwritten note. It said they thought I was a cost. I became the value they couldn't replace. I had kept that note for years, not because I wanted to remember the company, but because I wanted to remember who I became after they tried to make me feel worthless. If there's one thing I learned from everything that happened, it's this. Don't waste your life trying to make people regret losing you. Build a life they couldn't have given you. There is a difference. Revenge keeps you connected to the people who hurt you. Success lets you walk away. Apex thought firing me would end my story. Instead, it became the first chapter of a completely different one. They thought they were cutting an expense. They didn't realize they were releasing an inventor. They thought my position was my value. It wasn't. They thought my salary was the cost of keeping me. It wasn't. They thought the company owned everything I could create. They were wrong. But the most important lesson wasn't about patents. It was about people. If you're listening to this, and you've ever been rejected, ignored, betrayed, or treated like you were replaceable, remember this: being undervalued doesn't mean you're worthless. Being overlooked doesn't mean you're incapable. Being fired doesn't mean you're finished. Sometimes the door that closes is the door that forces you to build your own. And sometimes the people who think they're destroying your future are actually pushing you toward it. The company that fired me to save $50,000 eventually paid millions to use my invention, but that's not the part I remember most. I remember the moment I walked out of conference room 7. I remember carrying my laptop bag. I remember feeling like I had lost everything. And I remember the tiny voice in my head saying, "Keep going." I listened. That changed my life. So if someone ever tells you that you're too expensive, too difficult, too ambitious, or too replaceable, don't spend all your energy proving them wrong. Take a breath. Look at what you've built. Learn your value. Protect your work. And keep moving. Because sometimes the greatest revenge isn't watching someone else fall. Sometimes it's standing years later in a life they never imagined you could build, and realizing you don't even care that they were wrong anymore. You already won. Not because they lost. Because you found yourself. And that was worth far more than $50,000. T. Sheehan D.